Hi, I'm Francina,
I'm Jackie.
and welcome to the Rest, Love, and Justice podcast.
This podcast is an inquiry into whether rest and love and justice can produce transformative social change. The dominant narrative is this overwork and this glorification of it, especially in the justice space. And here, we're going to question that notion.
Come sit with us as we meet our collective humanity and share stories around rest, love, and justice. It is our hope to create a shift that enables us to recognize that racial justice work is a human issue. It affects us all.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Rest, Love, and Justice podcast. My name is Jackie Gao.
And I am Francina Call.
And I want to switch it up for a second here before we start into this really important conversation. I just want to take a pause and invite everyone listening and ourselves to tune into our own rest practices. We've talked a lot about that in this podcast, but just take a moment. We'll give it like 10 seconds of just thinking about the last thing you did that was a gift for yourself in the theme of rest. So just taking a moment. I love that we both just took a breath. Just an invitation to slow it down before we get into a really important theme for us. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking that pause.
Thanks for leading us in that space too. I think that sometimes we just kind of want to lurch into what we're doing next, and that pause is exactly what I needed. So thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Yeah.
And so today we're gonna just take a little bite out of a question that we have for ourselves, for this podcast, for the work that we do in the world. Is racial repair possible?
Yeah. And I just want to have full disclaimer that Jackie and I are in a very tender spot around this conversation. And there was a part of me that just didn't even want to talk about it. But I think for us to remain authentic and for us to remain open and honest in this process, that this is not easy. And yes, we love each other, but it's a choice every day to show up. So I think this is actually a really good moment for us to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think too, as it relates to rest as well, I mean, if you have been following along for our, like the arc of this podcast so far, we talk a lot about the inequities of access to rest.
That's right.
And just the weathering of the white supremacy culture that we live in. So this conversation of whether racial repair is possible absolutely connects to rest. Mm-hmm. And as many researchers that we followed have talked about, that rest actually is an inequality that kind of spans many other inequalities, like health, like job security, like housing. So that's why we think rest is such an important, like, kind of theme and aspect to this question as well.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just start by saying, like, I didn't know this phrase racial repair until kind of like mid through last year.
Yeah.
So, and maybe just, defining it for ourselves.
Yeah. I think for me, when I heard the theme racial repair, it kind of put words to what our relationship is. I think about when something is broken and it gets repaired, it's being put back together, hopefully in a way that is aligned. So like if you break your leg, right, and you just put a cast on it and you don't actually repair it to be aligned, then it doesn't heal right and your leg is never the same. And so I look at racial repair as an opportunity for both races of parties that are in the repair to look at not only their relationship, but also the history of what they've come from and how that repair is going to come together, right? It is very sticky and complicated because we all have very different histories, right? I was born in Zimbabwe and come from a very colonial history. So most of the white people that were in my orbit were from England, right? And I have a very different approach living in the United States too, and a different experience with race and the messaging that was around me being Black and what what power white people had over me when I was growing up. I remember going to school in Zimbabwe, and we were all forced to speak English. And speaking our language, which is Shona, was not allowed. And if you were caught speaking Shona at school, you would actually get punished for it. And so at the time, it was couched as, we are helping you to speak English, and English will help you to be more successful. But what it was doing was minimizing the importance of my culture, my language, and what my ancestors would have passed down to me through language, through just even like sayings and phrases and stories and song. Like, we didn't sing a lot of songs in my language, right? And so that's just one nugget of what living in a colonized culture did to me. And so then put me in this situation living in the United States. Am I going to have the courage to speak up about things that are culturally important to me? Right? And so those are some things that I think are important to bring up for people who are entering relationships with Black people and you're white, or white people when you're Black, having that cultural sensitivity to, what is your story around race for you and what you've come from? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I love this metaphor about like repair and like a broken, bone or something like that, because our systems are constantly actively repairing. Yeah. It's not just one, over a 24-hour period, your bone repairs and it's done. And I think that's, for me, what repair is. It's like, it's a continual conversation. It's, I guess from my story, I love that we tell stories in this space, but because I think it's a good way of expressing how we feel. But I definitely bought into the propaganda in high school that we learned about the civil rights movement in the United States, and it's done. The legislation was passed and it's over. Like, I mean, there was the history, of course, of slavery and then Jim Crow. And then there was this kind of finality of repairs, or, everything's done. Yeah. We don't need to do more. And so I like this broken bone kind of thing, because I think it's first an acknowledgement of like a horrific history. Yes. And also like the perpetuation of those same systems currently in education, in the prison system, in all the capitalism systems. That's right. So I think that's, for me, something that it's like knowing that it's got to be active. I can't just acknowledge it. It has to be ongoing. It has to be action oriented. Yeah. And I'll just say, I'm not doing it well many times, as you know, like even we had a conversation like around money this week for a nonprofit that we're starting. And how can I acknowledge that topics, let's say even around money, are going to feel or be violent if I say certain things because of the history that is so violent. Yeah. And is still violent. Like it's currently still violent, like the anti-Blackness, let's say just in the United States. So there's something to me.
And just to be clear, it's everywhere. Anti-Blackness is all over the world, not just in the US, but go on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I guess to me, I'm still very much learning and grappling with like, how do we be business partners? Yeah. And then, or nonprofit partners or podcast co-hosts and be partners. But then how do I acknowledge that some things, or maybe everything, is going to be different? I have power because of the pigment of my skin that's backed up by the legal system, by like so many systems. So I still don't get it. And I'm still working on it. And I really just want to acknowledge and thank you for the additional energy it takes you to feel when I'm ignorant.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's multiple factors to consider, especially like even in the situation that happened with us this past week. I feel like for white people, there's not always an acknowledgement of the incredible energy that we have to overcome to speak up for something that is important to us. And I think, especially if you're like beginning a relationship with someone who is Black and you're white, or vice versa, right? Understanding that for that person, a Black person, to speak up about what they need in a relationship, there is a tremendous amount of energy cost, because trust me, you're talking yourself out of it all the time, right? And I think that the foundation needs to be built of trust. Trust, especially if you're in a relationship with someone that you really care about or someone that you love, that this person isn't out to get me or isn't out to hoodwink me out of something, but maybe listening deeper of like, okay, if they've asked for something, I'm going to give all my energy to understanding what the need behind this is before the response that is different than if someone you didn't know walked up on the street and said, hey, I need X, Y, and Z from you, right? There has to be a foundation of trust with one another, and you build that over time. And I really love that you even brought back the whole metaphor of broken bones take time to heal. It's not going to happen in an instant, right? But there is always that hurdle of overcoming to ask for what you need. And knowing also that for most Black people, they're not always believed that their needs can be met and that their needs are valid, right? A lot of times, Black people's needs are like, people try to talk me out of my need. Are you sure you really need that? Like, is that really, I don't know, is that really important? I was watching a documentary on Toni Morrison, and she was in an interview with a white man who was basically kind of critiquing her writing and saying that it's too limited because it's focused only on Black people. And she said, is it limiting to focus on Black people? Do you ask your white authors that their writing is limited because it's focused on white people, right? And I look at that statement and can put it in this situation to say, why do the expression of need from a Black person, why does it have to be analyzed before it's believed to be, okay, I guess this is a need for you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that is work that white people have to do, because this is the system that is conditioned to question, is it necessary for them? Is it necessary for them to request whatever it is they need? Is it necessary for them to rest more? Is it necessary for them to have more time off? Is it necessary for them to get paid more money for that? And yet in the same situation, a white person saying, this is what it is I need, it's believed and it's met without question, right? So yes, I believe relational repair is possible, but there has to be the underlying foundation of trust if the relationship is going to continue in a fluid, open way, so that, as healing happens, blood flow is restored in the fracture, right? And healing is restored in that fracture. There's got to be trust. And it's not to minimize the fact that questions don't come up in white people, right? It's like, oh, yeah, they may come up, but maybe there needs to be a community that you go and process that with that isn't necessarily the Black body, right? And it's not to say that conversations can't be had between, us in whatever the question is or whatever, but definitely, just like we began this podcast, having a pause to look at it from the vantage point of trust first before the launch into inquiry about, is this valid? Is it necessary? Is it important enough? Because most people of color are constantly grappling with, are they worthy of the same attention? Are they worthy of the same concern? Are they worthy of the same rest, right? And so I'm speaking to you, if you're Black, you are worthy. And it is still important to override your anxieties to speak up about the thing that you need, because if you don't speak up for it, no one is going to meet it. And we have years, centuries of histories of minimizing Black people's needs, centuries. And that doesn't change overnight, but it does change with each opportunity, each moment where you stand up and say, I really need this. And it takes time.
Yeah. And I think this is not like a how to or
Oh my
anything.
God, no.
And again, I'll just definitely acknowledge my limitations here. And I thought we could just share things that I think have helped, like language that's helpful, like you said, even about needs. Like I think we've said things like, hey, if for some reason it's in conflict with each other, we say, well, can we work towards that?
Yeah.
Like, so it's not going to be possible to do that, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's the goal.
Yeah.
You're not limiting your needs. You're saying your needs, and I'm saying this, my needs feel different, but also acknowledging the dominant system and the pattern, and then going for it. So at least like there's just, I don't want to say it's a compromise, but it's a conversation.
Yeah.
Where you're like, my needs haven't changed. This is still what is needed.
Yeah.
And then I hear that and I say, okay, like I hear that your need is not less.
Yeah.
And I can fully hear your need, and I can see that. I don't know. And it was sticky too. Yeah. Some of the, like many of the times it's sticky work because we want to be in alignment.
Yes.
We want to be in alignment and live that. So I think that has been helpful. And still messy. I think the other thing too is, I know one of our teachers, Resma Menikin, says, like, don't go out and find a partner across race.
Yes.
They will find you.
Yeah.
Like, so he's speaking to white bodies.
Yeah.
And he's like, don't go find your neighbor who is a Black person that you want to do some wellness thing with. Like, and I really feel like we did organically come together on this project over time, over trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's just good advice, I think, for a lot of white people in that community to hear, like, don't go rush out and try to do racial repair.
Yeah. I do think, though, that can also become a stumbling block for white people to pursue relationships with Black people. Because the truth is, most Black folks are pretty open. And I feel like a lot of people will only try to get to know me to a point. There is a way to befriend people across races. And there's a way to do it that is authentic, that is intentional, and that is kind. It is different than when you just like meet a regular person of the same race, yes, but there's a way to do it to where there is some consistency, and there's care, and there's concern, and there's a desire to want to know the other person. And I think that always breaks down barriers. I don't think that you need to find people like they're a project. No. But who are the people of color that are in your life right now? And what relationships do you have with them? And if you are trying to grow in this realm of race, understanding, and repair, not that you go to them to be your teacher, but you can be a friend. Yeah. And if there's a need, you can say, hey, I wanted to bring you dinner. Or you can knock on their door and bring some flowers. I mean, we all know how to be a friend. And somehow when we get to race, it becomes this like, I don't know. I don't want to offend. I think we can just be kind, and we can be human, and don't go out there looking for people to be projects, but you can be a friend. You can be a friend and not have them in your life as a token Black person so that you prove that you're not racist.
It's so simple, like, as you say that, and the white culture is just it's so prevalent, that like project, example, like have it serve.
And I've been that for a lot of people.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this question too as it's coming to me, but like, what is your hope for racial repair? Like,
I think that it's still emerging. I think that it would be really amazing that we would live in a society, and I look at it more for my children because I don't know if it's all going to happen in my lifetime, but for my children to show up as who they are, to be met as who they are, and not need to jump through the hoops of code switching and trying to, position themselves in situations so that white people feel comfortable and don't think this about them. My son went to school today in a full afro, and I was so proud of him that he wasn't trying to mute who he was. He didn't want to tamper who he was. And he has friends that are like, dude, that is the coolest hair, right? Now, as a mom, I'm like, is it cool hair, or you're just afraid that, like people want to touch it, and there's all this energy around it too. Like, so there's learning that needs to happen, I think. But if the parents aren't learning, the kids can't learn, right? So I'd like to believe that, yes, it is possible, but there has to be a whole lot of intention to how we show up in these relationships and how we approach people that are of different races. And we can't do it with the same glasses that we wear when we are approaching our white relationships, if you're white, right? And
Absolutely.
Same as for me when I'm approaching Black people, it's a very different vibe. So
Yeah.
anyways, I feel like we're complete on this. I think that we will have more conversations around this. And there is a piece of this flow that felt a little like all over the place for me, because it is. It actually is in real time, kind of jumbled up because it's difficult. And I still choose you. And I still choose this work. And I still choose this relationship, because I do this not just for my children to model for them that this is possible, but as long as I can feel that I am loved and I can speak up for who I am, and I feel comfortable to do that in this relationship, then we're actually changing the world, and we are modeling for other people, not because we're specialists, but because we choose to show up in this work.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. And that's it, folks. We are so grateful that you joined us on this podcast, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Peace and love.
Peace and love.
And that is our show for this week. This episode was produced by The City Music. As for me, I'm Jackie Gao, and thanks to my co-host, Francina Call.
May you move through this week embodying rest, love, and justice in ways that are meaningful to you and your community. Thanks for joining us today. Peace and love.